Okay. All right. So
all right.
Now the mics are unselected. So here we go.
Should we just start over?
Yeah. So this has been one of those days, guys.
It's all going to be fine.
We're 4 minutes into the podcast right now, and this is the first thing you're hearing because the mics were muted. We just came off of a challenging few moments of parenting, which are interesting.
Yes.
And so here we are. We're here. We're
going to make it happen.
So anyway, what we're talking about today is what we're calling...
Get ourselves together enough to keep going. All right.
What we're calling our chaos loop, which is the thing we have right here. And then we also have the other side of this, which is a freedom loop. And this is just from our experience, kind of what we experienced financially. And the chaos loop being the thing that will drag you down. And it's like a downward spiral into a bigger and deeper mess financially. And then on the other hand, we have this freedom loop that works in the opposite direction. And that leads you, it's an upward spiral, which is awesome, right?
Right.
And anyway, so this is such a powerful thing. Like once we were kind of able to see this through this lens, and again, like I've had the opportunity to be able to talk to thousands of people about their finances and hear their financial situation. And so there's just some patterns here. So even outside of our own lives, I feel like I've been able to see this at work in different people's lives and identify, all right, there is a pattern here, that there are so many people who are stuck in this chaos loop that we're talking about here. And then there are some who manage to get out of that.
They break out of it, yeah. And you're like, what? How did they do that? What's the secret here?
And these are the things I've identified with that. And so I want to just comment on this a little bit. And so kind of looking at this, it starts with this triggering event, okay? And this can be any number of things.
You get a flat tire.
Yeah. So like
you
that
have
was one
a
for us
medical
before.
bill.
Yeah, unexpected. Last year we had an unexpected series of medical bills. It was $20,000.
Yeah.
That was a significant triggering event.
Or you lose your job.
Yeah, like that's a big one. I mean, it could be any kind of thing. We were talking to somebody.
2020 happens.
Yeah. We were talking to somebody who said that, every once in a while they open their banking app and they're like, I have no idea what's going to be in there. And then they see, and then it's like, all right, new thing is triggered. Okay.
Right.
So yeah, and I remember, one of these moments, like kind of where we can talk about some of this story a little bit, but when I was driving home from a conference in Texas,
So Bob's driving home from a conference in Texas. He calls me once and he's like, Linda, I just got a speeding ticket. And I was like, okay, all right, well, that stinks, but, and he's like, he wants to get it fixed because, it's better for your record or whatever. And so then he calls me a couple hours later and goes, Linda, I got another speeding ticket. And then I'm not kidding you, like maybe 2 weeks after that, you got another one. And you're like, they tagged our car. The police know, they're following us. Do you remember that?
Okay.
You're like, how is this? And I'm like, listen, dude, I've been driving this car too, and I have not gotten one ticket.
So I will say this.
I think it's your driving,
Those
bro.
Those 2 tickets came while I was driving through Oklahoma. So shade to Oklahoma, but if you're driving through Oklahoma, be careful. I'll just say that.
I mean, this was like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
They might have a whole new system in place at this point. But anyway.
So point is,
3 tickets within
that was a triggering event, and what happens with this is, when you have this triggering event, it leads to panic in many cases.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, what do I do? What?
Well, and we all handle panic differently, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's like, so yeah, for you go into panic mode and you're like, all right, what do you do? What's usually your default?
I try to solve it with my brain. I think that's the best way to put it. I try to figure out, all right, this is what's going on. And then, while the fear is kind of setting in, like, what can I do? How can I blah, 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 blah. Like, really, I would say it's not turning to God. It's not, and when I'm at my worst, it's not turning to God. It's me trying to figure out my own strength,
Well, and I think for me, I start feeling panicked and then I start feeling restricted because I think, well, we're going to have to pay for this somehow. So we can't pay for it, out of a magic money account, which I always talk about magic money. But we're going to have to figure out where it's going to come from. And then I start feeling really restricted. And then that triggers my desire to shop more. So I end up just going and spending money when I get panicked.
So panicking just amplifies it.
It makes it worse. Like
Yeah.
instead of trying to fix it, it's because I think, how can we fix it? And I don't know how, that I start to feel even more restricted. And that's when
Yeah.
I just like emotionally shop.
Yeah. And so out of that panic comes this resisting phase. Okay. And so this is resisting, I mean, kind of what you were just talking about there, resisting facing the facts. Like we know some people who this is the point where they bury their head in the sand, pretend like it's not happening. But also in this is kind of maybe a restriction component where it's like, maybe going into hyper penny pinching mode where it's like, all right, you have a whatever $10,000 bill that just came due because of a medical expense, and it's like, all right, now I'm going to go cut Netflix or something, and it's like, okay,
$7
that's fine,
a month is
but
not going to
that's
fix the
not going
problem.
to solve the problem.
Yeah,
and it doesn't mean don't try to do
Right.
as much as you can, but out of desperation, you might think that's. Yeah, I just have to do this, and there's 100 things like that, and like that doesn't solve the problem.
honestly, I do that a lot. I'm like, Bob, what if we did this, this, and this? And you're like, that's going to save us $30. We need $1,000.
Yeah. So again, and it's not like, because this can go either direction. You can go to the extreme of like not trying anything, and it's like so it's all a matter of the heart and your mindset in all of this, because also in this phase is like maybe the shame and blame thing where it's like. So I go get these 3 speeding tickets in 2 weeks, and now it's hard to buy groceries. And so
I'm like,
you didn't do this,
I
but
didn't.
you could have.
I could have easily been
if you would have just driven blah, 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 then
just
we'd be
drive
able
the
to buy
speed
groceries.
limit. What the heck?
Yeah.
After you got one ticket, wasn't that enough for you to learn your lesson? Clearly not.
Yeah.
I didn't say any of that. I'm just saying it now.
I think you did great when I remember that. But and then this phase leads to this stalling phase, or what we're calling a stalling phase. And this is where, again, like this is a continuation of the burying your head in the sand, but also what I would say is short-term urgency at the sake of long-term wisdom. Okay,
Yeah.
so the idea of like kicking the can down the road. And so making decisions right now just to survive that are going to have negative consequences in the future. So an extreme example of this, like as this downward spiral goes down and down and down, like you get to the point where you got all these credit cards and you can't even pay the minimums anymore. And so now you're going to get a payday loan at 150% interest or something insane just to be able to get by for the next 2 weeks. But then it's just going to be worse next month because now you got to deal with that payday loan on top of that. So you got to go get another one. And so it's this constant begging Peter to pay Paul, robbing Peter to pay Paul thing.
Yeah.
And so anyone who, if you're listening to this, like, if you live in any amount of life, you probably know what I'm talking about. Even if you haven't been in the depths of this downward cycle, you understand what I'm talking about. Because even if you've done well financially, you've probably seen pieces of this in your life where you've just kind of struggled with this a little bit. And that's the thing. It's like you want to stop it in its tracks as fast as you can.
Right.
And so the way that you do this is by, let me go get over to our next slide here, what we call the freedom loop. And if you notice, these two are moving in opposite direction. And so this freedom loop is moving clockwise, whereas the chaos loop is moving counterclockwise. Because that's the thing. If you have all this inertia spinning in this direction, like you can't just immediately stop it, but you need to do things going in the opposite direction to start pushing back against it, you know? And as you can imagine, these aren't like overnight fixes that instantly change all this stuff. But the point is you want to start doing what you can do in this freedom loop to kind of work against what's happening in the chaos loop.
Yeah.
And to begin having more momentum going in this direction to where you have that upward spiral. Okay. And so anyway, so this whole process, and we'll spend a little bit more time going over this process today, but this whole process begins with identifying, okay? And it's identifying that one big money-saving opportunity or one big opportunity to kind of reduce your spending, whatever that is, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's a couple different approaches to this, but one that I want to talk about today is based off of a decluttering kind of method that I heard about called the RFC method, okay? And so let me just come over here and I'll break this down. So this is a decluttering method that people will use when decluttering their house to kind of determine what to keep, what to get rid of, and things like that. And so it asks 3 different questions. So the first one is recency. Have I used this item in the last 90 days? Okay. The second one is frequency. Do I use it regularly? And the third one is cost. Could I replace it for less than $20? And by going through your house and just kind of looking at the items on your shelf and just asking these questions, you can evaluate whether or not you should keep the item or save it or whatever else. And it's just a helpful framework because we've gone through a couple different phases of like mass decluttering. And I know having these mental models to kind of work through is super helpful.
Well, and you can also think about it like if you have a storage unit full of stuff.
Yes.
And, you know, it's like if you get a storage unit because you're moving from one house to the next and you're going to be using everything, you know, that's reasonable. That's understandable. But if you just have a storage unit of just a bunch of random stuff that you're like, one day I'm going to sell this, you find out, like, is it costing you more to store it than what you would, like, the pay you would get back from it? And it's hard to be honest with yourself about that.
Yeah,
but
and
like,
we talked to, or I remember hearing somebody's story who basically had this big old storage unit of all the stuff they were going to sell, and they were paying a ton of money for it each month. And the reality is they probably couldn't sell everything in there for more than a couple months worth of what they were paying.
I think it was more than 1 month. I don't think they could.
So anyway, so the point is, it's just a helpful way to kind of think through and evaluate.
Yeah.
But in terms of what we're talking about today, I want to break this down and kind of look at how we can use this for our money. And I want to break it out by what I'm calling the cost versus frequency matrix. Okay. And so
Bob loves a good matrix. That's his favorite movie too.
I mean, a long time ago it was. I don't know if I still say that.
What's your favorite movie now, you think?
Oh.
He's like the Passion of the Christ.
Passion of the Christ.
Only Jesus movies.
I think it's a new one coming out.
What's your favorite book? The Bible?
Man, well, if you heard our episode the other day, Sound of Freedom was pretty impactful.
Yeah, it really was.
But anyway. Okay, coming back.
So You've Got Mail is not...
You've Got Mail
on that list?
is on my list of 1 to 50,000 somewhere. I would say it's in the quadruple digits if I were guessing.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so the cost versus frequency matrix. Okay, so on this axes here, I love saying axes. This is the cost. Okay, so more dollar signs, higher cost, $1 sign lower. Okay, and then on this side, we're looking at anything on the right side of this is things that we're doing more frequently, and then things that we're doing less frequently. Right.
On the left.
On the left side of this whole matrix, we have things that we just do not use very frequently. And on the right side, we have things that we use all the time.
The top is more expensive. At the bottom is less expensive.
Yeah. And so if you're listening and you're not driving, grab a piece of paper, grab your phone or something. It'd probably be easier with a piece of paper, and just draw this thing out. And let's start getting some items on here of things that spending decisions that you might be making soon or that you've recently made. Okay. And so I'm going to share a couple examples of what this could be and what this might look like. Okay. So just pulling this up here. So on the first spot, all the way in this top left corner, we have a boat. Okay. So it's super expensive. So it's super high up.
This is not going to be for everyone. This is for us, right?
Yeah.
We do this for ourselves.
This is completely different for every individual.
Yes.
So in this case, we have, for us, if we owned a boat, in which, as part of me would love to own a boat, the reality is we would not use it very frequently. And it's super expensive.
We'd use it maybe like twice a year.
Yeah, it would probably just be a couple times a year.
Yeah.
Okay. Also on this less frequent side, what we have is, if you don't even know what this thing is, it's a floor nailer. And so we laid down, in our old house, we laid down a hardwood floor. And so I bought a floor nailer to lay down that hardwood floor. Okay. I used it one time. And so it was very infrequent. It was, relatively expensive. It was a tool I had to buy. Over on the other side, we have, an iPhone or something. So it's not cheap. It's a little bit higher up on this matrix, but it is something that we're using all the time.
All the time.
Very frequently.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. If you're drinking Starbucks 3 times a day, it's kind of in the middle range of price. And this is all relative. Like, this, you can look at this anyway. You can look at this, Starbucks versus Folgers versus, Barista Parlor here in Nashville and the price range, however you want to do it. But the point is
I just got a $9 latte the other day, and I just saw it come through on the thing, and I was like, are you kidding me? Well, I don't want to say, because I do like that place, but it just was a $9 latte.
Really?
And I was like,
Dang.
never again. This is
Got some expensive
this
coffee
is
here,
too
guys.
much. Like it was a moment of enjoyment. Is that the word?
Sure.
But I saw the price and I was like, I can't do that again.
Yeah. So anyway, and then over in this bottom right-hand corner, we have Netflix, okay? And so again, this depends on, but we watch Netflix a good bit. So it's relatively low cost,
Right.
like whatever, $10, $12 a month, and it's
And
super
the
high frequency.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, like you were saying, it's important to note this is very different for everyone. Like, you might be listening and you're like, wait a minute, I have a Netflix subscription that I've been paying for an entire year and I haven't used it once. And so then
Right.
now that moves all the way over to the left side of this matrix for you. And it's like, that's probably something you should get rid of, you know,
Yep.
if you're just not using it, you know. And the goal of this whole matrix is to move as many things towards the right to maximize the value that you get out of everything you buy. Because if it's all the way on this left side, you're just not maximizing the value of what you
Right.
get out of it.
But
right?
like a contractor needs a floor nailer.
Yeah,
They need it in their life.
yeah. And an essential part of what they're doing and probably are using it way more frequently than
Yeah.
I am, you know? But the bottom line, in the top left corner, this is the stuff that generally we want to avoid buying.
Right.
And this falls into the category of rent or borrow. This is a rent or borrow zone, right? And so in our case, as much as I would love to have a boat, it makes a whole lot more sense for us to rent a boat once or twice a year than for
Yeah.
me to buy one. And the same thing with that floor nailer. Like it would have been, since I only used it one time, it would have been a whole lot smarter for me
Do
to.
we still have that?
No, I ended up selling it, which
Oh,
is,
good.
and we'll talk about that in a minute,
Good.
like the benefit of doing that, the advantage of that. But that just would have been a better thing for me to rent
Yeah.
rather than buy, you know? And on the other hand, on the other side of things, like I think there are like rent to own companies who have some of these super frequent items that people are renting that it's like, maybe you shouldn't rent that. I remember my first apartment, I rented a couch, an end table, and I don't like, they
because
just,
you only lived there for a few
they
months.
furnished my apartment, but like once I
Yeah.
found out, realized how much I was paying per month for all this stuff, I'm like, I can go buy all this stuff, probably better stuff,
And then
for way
resell
cheaper.
it.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it was such a ripoff.
Oh my
you know.
gosh.
But the point is, they were items I was frequently using, like every day, but I was renting them, and I should have been buying
Wow.
them. You know. So
Interesting.
anyway.
Okay.
And another thing to note here, like we kind of just mentioned here, like with this floor now, as your life changes, things very well are going to shift from side to side, you know, and I guess potentially maybe even up and down, you know.
Yeah,
And
because once
so-
you get kids, things change, you know.
Yeah.
Once your kids move out or they just even move past like a certain age, you know.
Yeah.
Things
No, I
will
mean,
change.
and I think back to, you know, earlier this year, we spent a month down in Florida on 30A, and we rode bikes. What? I don't know, almost every other
Almost
day.
every day,
Probably,
yeah.
if it wasn't raining, we probably rode bikes. So we had a really high frequency, and we were doing it. And then we came back here, and we've ridden our bikes like one time in the last 6 months. Right? So it's like,
Maybe
so this
twice.
can be really quick. Like
Right.
it can change really, really quick. But
Yeah.
but the point is, like, think through your life in terms of things that might have shifted or slid from one side to the other. And like we just kind of mentioned with this floor nailer, this is an opportunity to also identify things that we can sell to make some money.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking back to, there was a time where I rode a scooter. I had a 50cc or 125cc, both of them, I guess, scooter as well as a motorcycle. And there was a time where I was riding them a bit more, and then they just like, you know, slowly moved further and further over to this left side
Right.
to where it's like they're taking up space in the garage. I'm having to maintain them, and I'm only riding actually 2 times a year. And it's like, all right, it's time
It's
for them to
time.
go. It's time to sell them.
That was sad. That was one of those things where I was like, oh man,
So
like we
yeah.
were sad to see it go, you know, but
This is a really important point, though, is that oftentimes a lot of these things that are really far on this left side that we're like struggling to get rid of, they are actually things that there's identity component tied up into it.
yeah. Or
And-
emotional component, you know.
Yeah, sentimental thing, but like the identity factor is a big one. Like, so the motorcycle, it's like I didn't have like a huge thing, identity piece of me being someone who rides a motorcycle, but that was part of who I was. And so that was like letting this go. I am no longer a motorcycle owner. You know, so there's something there.
I wonder
but-
who's surprised by Bob saying he's a motorcycle owner right now.
yeah, I don't know.
They're like, really?
Not anymore. Used to be. I might rent one once in a while, but But the thing that was more significant for me, in which I still am not even done with, is music. Like, I used to be a worship leader at my church, for many, many years, and really involved in music and writing, recording music, and really involved. It was a huge part of my life, and it just isn't anymore.
Yeah.
And I did get rid of a lot of equipment, but there's still probably too many guitars that I own. Like, I probably don't need, I guess I have 4 guitars. I probably don't need 4 guitars anymore.
4?
I mean, including the bass, yeah.
Wow. The kids, though, pulled out the electric guitar and the amp the other day. I left the room.
They don't know how to play yet. They don't know how to play, so it doesn't sound great.
They pulled out that and the harmonica, and I was like, bye, have fun.
Yeah. So anyway, that's an important thing to consider as well, is like, how is your identity being tied up in some of these things?
Right.
So kind of like flipping this, or not even flipping it, but another simple way that I like to think about all these things is through the lens of cost per use. Okay. And I know you've talked about this a lot with clothes and how these kind of pieces work together. But I think this is such a helpful way to think about spending decisions that you might make,
right?
And or purchases that you have made. And it's a really simple math problem. Basically, you take the cost of the item and you divide it by the number of uses that you have, and that gives you the cost per use. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, we'll go over a couple examples here in a second, but you're never going to know this number exact. Like, I mean, you're super nerdy if you have a spreadsheet where you're writing down every time I wear that shirt, so it's like, I'm not encouraging that.
It's not worth your time is, I guess, what we're saying. But yes.
But using a rough ballpark, like you're using this as a way to kind of gauge in general. It's like, I can look at pieces in my closet and say, I've worn that 2 times, or that I've worn probably hundreds of times.
Right.
And that's the big thing. We're looking for the big, obvious thing there. And so like with the motorcycle, it was pretty clear for me to remember, I think I've ridden that 2 times this year.
Yeah.
And therefore, like that, especially if I were going to buy it at that point.
You never would.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Right.
And I think that's what honestly like helped me. And not that we were ever super serious about buying a boat, but something where it's like, that's something that I would like to think through that lens of realistically, how often would we, like our season is much shorter here too. It's like so many months a year, we can't even use it if we wanted to. And we'd have to drive over to the lake, and how many weekends are we actually going to do it? Like, it just wouldn't happen very much. And so, best case, it would be a couple times a year, you know?
Yeah.
And what that ends up being is, okay, so depreciation on boats is terrible. And so that probably means each trip is a few $1,000s.
Oh, my gosh.
And so it's like, it's probably just a lot cheaper to rent.
Yeah.
It's just a lot cheaper to rent. And so anyway, so kind of looking at a couple examples here. One example, like from my life right now, like I am wearing a pair of joggers or sweatpants, whatever you want to call them. And
sweatpants is the old term. Now they're called joggers.
And so I have bought multiple joggers from H&M, where I've paid somewhere from $20 to $30 for them or something. And the problem with them, and honestly a lot of clothes from H&M that I've bought, is that it just doesn't last. And
you wear those for about 3 months, and then you're like, this is stretched out honestly, everywhere.
A lot of times I feel like I wash it once, and it's like just not the same. And
well, yeah.
Anyway, by contrast, right now I'm wearing a pair of joggers that I bought from Lululemon that cost $120. And the first time I saw that price tag, I'm like, that's insane. Why would I ever pay 4 times as much for a pair of pants? Like,
yeah.
But here's the thing. This is why, okay? I'm going to show you this right here. This H&M pair of joggers, $30. I'm saying at best, maybe 10 uses, which comes out to $3 per use. Okay? Now, these Lululemon joggers, I don't know if I've worn them 100 times yet, but I have no doubt. I'm going to wear them 100 times.
Yeah.
I wear them nonstop. They're like
they're your favorite pants.
If you ever see me, they're probably the pants that I have on. And so they're $120, but I conservatively would say that I'm going to get 100 uses out of them if I haven't already. And so that comes out to $1.20 per use.
Right.
So even though they're 4 times more expensive, they're actually a far better value and better purchase for me to make than these H&M joggers.
Not to mention, you could probably resell them, and you can't resell H&M
like that's
joggers.
a whole nother factor. And they look better. I like that.
You look hot
everything. There you go.
Let's be real.
So you look hotter too.
You look hotter too.
And so I understand. Yeah. So another piece to add to this too
you do,
is
though.
At the what I would say at the beginning of our marriage, when we were like broke as broke can be, I wouldn't have been able to buy these.
Right.
So that's another factor to consider here. Sometimes you are at a season where you just have to buy the cheaper thing. And if that's where you are, that's what you have to do. Like, that's fine. But you need to understand that this is still at play either way.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just a random clothing tip because, why not throw it in here? But I noticed that some of the items that I spend less money on, if I were to try it on again brand new, I would probably still like it. But because I've washed it and it's gotten weird, it goes out of style for me a lot faster. However, there's a J. Crew sweater I bought probably 10 or 11 years ago that is cashmere, and it still looks good. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, styles have changed, lots has changed, but for some reason, it was like an item that I spent more money on, and it still looks good. And I think that there's part of that in there where it's like, well, sure, it's not just that. Like, I have a lot of people who are like, well, I just like new styles. And it's like, no, you like feeling great in your clothes. Do you know what I mean?
It's true, yeah.
And if you are spending just a couple pennies on something because you're like, well, it's on sale, it's $3, I should just buy it. It's like, yeah, but that's still $3 that you're throwing down the toilet. I don't know. That's just...
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
That's just a clothing hack that I found.
Yeah.
That works.
All right, so let's look at one more quick example. And so this comes back to that floor nailer. So both of these items I spent $100 on. So I bought a drill and I bought a floor nailer, okay? Floor nailer, one use, $100 per use. The drill, I've used well over 100 times. We'll conservatively say 100
I mean, it's
uses.
way more than that.
I know.
It's probably 200 to 300.
Probably use it weekly, maybe
Yeah, you
more than
use that a lot.
And so that comes down to well under probably $1 per use. And so the point is, like, these are just factors to consider and ways to identify as you're making new spending decisions and or thinking about past ones and what you can learn from that. This is just going to help you think through that. So anyway, all that to say, that's all phase one of this freedom loop is identifying some of these spending opportunities. This is just one way to do that. There's multiple ways to do that, but this is one way I wanted to highlight today. And so the next part of this, I went too far.
Uh-oh.
Here we go. The next part is this manage component, okay? And so if we take a step back and look at what it actually means to manage something, dictionary.com says that it's to take charge or to take care of. And I wonder how many people, like, because I talk to people all the time who would say, or if I asked you this question, are you doing that? Are you managing your money? Are you taking care of? Are you taking charge of your money?
Are you being the boss?
And there's a lot of people who would answer that question with no.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeking to solve with this part of this freedom loop. In Parable of Talents in Matthew 25, like, it's a really strong clue for us that we have a responsibility, to manage what we have been entrusted with well. And so here's go ahead.
And, okay, we have several different settings on our dishwasher. And sometimes my kids will push a bunch of buttons and it will go on the rinse cycle. So just because the dishwasher ran, the dishes are not actually getting clean. So what I would like to liken that to is just because you say you have a budget or something doesn't mean it's actually working for you and it's actually doing the best thing or the thing that you need it to do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, because there's plenty of people who say that they budget when really all they're doing is tracking or looking to see what happened in the past, which is not budgeting.
Yes.
But we can get more to that later. But anyway, here's a question to ask yourself. And I heard someone present this it was in a business book and was talking about, CEOs, and I'm the CEO of our organization, I guess. And the question was this: if you got fired today and a new CEO came in, what would they do? What would they do differently from what you're doing now?
Yeah.
And what's really helpful about this question is it allows you to step outside of yourself and to evaluate what you are doing in light of what someone else would do. And it helps you take an honest look.
What you would hope they would do better than you.
Yeah, it helps you take an honest look at what's actually going on and get you outside of your fears and get you outside of, all that. And so we can apply this to our money and ask a similar question to us right now. So if I hired someone to manage all of your money, what would they do differently than you are doing right now? And you can use this the same way. Like, if you brought someone in, what would they do? And
Yeah.
if they managed it, take this, if they managed it the way that you have been managing your money, would you give them a raise or would you fire them? And this can be really humbling,
I'd give myself a raise. Let's do that.
when you take an honest look at yourself and what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just gonna be really, really helpful.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, let's see. Let me come on over here real quick. So yeah, I want to look at. There's a couple different ways there's a lot of things to talk about in this managed component, but what I want to highlight now is what we call the one category budget. And so if you've read our book, Simple Money, Rich Life, you probably, a little Joe Bidenism there.
Oh my gosh.
If you've read our book, you probably saw this in one of the chapters, but what I love about it is it's the 80-20 approach to budgeting, where you can get 80% of the results of budgeting with only doing 20% of the work.
We
and so
like
for
this.
people who are like, I swore off budgeting, I don't ever want to do that
Right.
again, this is the easiest, simplest thing you can do to start getting some of the benefits of it without committing all the time and energy towards it, okay? And so anyway, so I'll give you a quick example of what this looks like. Essentially what you're doing is you're identifying the one category of spending that you are most likely to overspend on, okay? And then you are going to open a checking account or get a gift card or get cash in an envelope or however you want to do it. Either one of those things where you're going to put the money in that you want to spend for that month, and that is the only source that you're spending out of.
Right. So we
Okay.
did this for groceries.
Yeah. So that's kind of where this all started for us.
Yeah.
And so what this looked like is if we want to only spend $500 a month on groceries, we're like, that seems reasonable. But because we're not paying attention to our spending, we just end up spending $600 or $700 a month on groceries. That's just what's happened the last few months.
Okay, but not $1,000 on groceries. Just giving you another little tip there is that be realistic with where you're reining it in.
Yeah,
and how you're reining it in.
And if you end up saving a significant amount, great. But the point is,
Right.
yes, be realistic with it.
Right.
But anyway, so let's say what we would do in that case, if we're spending, say, $700 a month, but we want to get it down to $500, we'd open a checking account, and that checking account has its own debit card, and we put $500 in there at the beginning of each month, and that's for groceries only.
Right.
And simply by having that one category just with that money there, it puts some walls in place, and it just adds just enough friction for us to rein in that spending and to, if we are halfway through the month and we've already spent $350 on groceries, it's like, okay,
Well,
we need to
tighten things up here.
Yeah. And or we just need to find a way to do it. But the point is it gets you looking at it. Whereas
Yeah.
when you're not looking at it, paying attention, if you spend $350 by mid-month, you just keep spending and that gets you to $700.
Right.
So anyway, so this has been a really simple way that we've used to kind of manage. Yeah. Go ahead.
Honestly, just the other day, or maybe it was this morning, I was like, hey, Bob, our grocery budget's getting pretty low. Have got a week left. Do we think we can just eat what we have in the house? Or maybe just get like a few things to make meals out of what we already have? And you start getting a little bit more creative, which is great. But also you just, like, you have to pay attention to what's going on. Otherwise, it's just so easy to overspend.
Yep.
Especially for me, I am a natural spender. You're a natural saver. And I think your natural inclination is to hoard money a little bit more. But I'm just like, well, we have to eat, so I'm going to get the most expensive, the expensive candies and the expensive cheeses and, whatever.
Yeah.
It's true,
You're good
right?
at that. You're good at that.
I mean, I've got great taste, is what I have to say.
Yeah. So as we pull it in with managing and really start managing what we have better, what that looks like is now we're moving towards the redirect phase of this. And this is where it gets really, really fun because now we're taking some of that surplus. And so that extra $100 to $200 that we just saved, instead of wasting it on groceries, now we can put that towards something that we actually want to spend on that's
Right.
more important to us, right?
Yes. Or it's something that we need to spend on, like going back to the original thing of like breaking out of that chaos loop.
Yep.
Is like, oh shoot, okay, well we have this unexpected expense. Now we have money that we can put towards that rather than just spending it on something else fun. Sometimes you have to put it towards something that just needs to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's an example in our book where we talked about someone who did this. Basically, they were paying $150 for cable each month and realized that cable TV was way on the left side of that matrix. And it's like they just weren't watching it. So why are they spending money on it? Just because everybody else did. It's like you don't need to. And So it's all the way in that left side of the matrix. They're like, let's get rid of that. And then at the same time, the guy realized, he looked at his bucket list, looked at something he'd been wanting to spend money towards for so long. He wanted to take flying lessons and learn how to fly. That was like a bucket list item for him. And he did the research and realized, wait a minute, I can start taking flying lessons for $150 a month. So they were able to take the cable that they didn't care about and put that money towards something that they really did care about.
Yeah.
And that's just such a powerful thing, because most people in that situation would feel like that's just so far out of reach. Like that's just so beyond what's capable. But that's why it's so important to look at this and to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But
You
this
have to pay
redirection
attention.
phase
Yeah.
is, really, really powerful. And that's just one example of so many. I know right now, like we're in a situation where we have 2 cars, and more than ever, we probably don't need 2 cars. And so like we could probably sell a car and get $10,000 for it. And so anyway, so it's a conversation that we're having right now and just trying to, I don't know, is it worth keeping? Is it worth getting rid of? And, and it's a decision that everyone has to make individually based on your situation. And I don't know what we'll do, but the point is like, be thinking about these things, you know? And thinking about like, what would I rather do with $10,000? Like, I think we can come up with some stuff. you know?
And I mean, if you are brainstorming this with your spouse, remember it's brainstorming. Don't shoot them down immediately. Think it through and like let it be a conversation. Because sometimes you come up with these crazy ideas where it is very natural for me to be like, no, I'm not doing that. But I mean,
is
the
very
whole
natural for her to do that.
whole point of it is to just be thinking beyond what is normal. Right?
Yeah.
That's the key here is like think beyond what's normal and what does everybody else do and what have we always done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so once you begin redirecting that money towards something you value, this is when you move into this enjoy phase. And this is really, really cool because you begin, because as you're doing that, you begin realizing like how fun this is because now you are redirecting more of that money towards things that are important to you, whether that's spending or giving. And you can do this all without any spending guilt. You can do this without any fear. And while you're eliminating, like you're choosing to spend on what's more important to you. So cutting out the cable, like you can now have the joy of missing out rather than the fear of missing out, which is a common term I've heard around the decluttering world. And I think it's just such a cool way to think about it. It's like, I now have the joy of missing out on having cable TV, or the joy of if we chose to get rid of our car because I'm putting my money towards something that's more important that I want to do. And that's so empowering and it's so fun. And once you kind of get into this enjoyment phase, like this is where it's like you begin to see the downstream benefits of your actions, you know? So like back to the chaos loop, the downstream act or event that happens after every action is that it gets worse. And so you do this one thing, and then 6 months from now, everything's going to be worse than it is now. And a year from now, everything's going to be worse. Whereas this is the opposite. So once you're at this point and you've made it to this point in the freedom loop, you now can look ahead and see, wow, a year from now, everything's going to be better.
If I just keep doing this.
I'm going to have less debt. I'm going to have more money saved. I will have been able to give more, whatever.
Right.
The point is you can see ahead and see that you're moving forward and you can see how things are going to benefit you over the long term, right?
Yes. And I mean, what is so surprising about people in the chaos loop and just continuing to stay in the chaos loop instead of this is that there's actually some enjoyment that comes out of this, whereas the chaos loop, I don't think there's nearly as much, like the payoff is not nearly as strong.
No, absolutely.
Like it's actually so much worse
but
when
this
you just stay in that, like, it's like you're always in this just like, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get out of this feeling?
Yeah. And this is what's crazy is before we ever went through a cycle of this loop, I had no interest in managing money. I had no interest in any money stuff. I'm like, I don't want to think about it. I just want to pretend like it's not a thing. But once we went through this, as soon as you go through it, everything becomes really fun.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, how do I do more of that?
Yeah.
And then that's what leads you back to this number one again. It's like, all right, let's look for another opportunity. Like, how do we keep this cycle going?
And honestly, when you're in this loop, you're thinking about it a lot less than when you're in the other loop.
Yep.
Because in the other loop, it's just so much panic and it's such negative feelings associated with it. But when you get in this loop, it's a lot more freeing. Yeah. It's the freedom loop.
Yeah. No, it really is. And I like,
but
it
frees up your mind so that you're not bogged down and burdened with it.
It frees up you financially, but also your mind. I mean, there's so many positive benefits of this upward spiral. And I know that I just had to go through that loop one time, and I've been hooked for life.
Yeah.
Like, because once you experience that, it's just addictive.
Right.
And so I want to just play a quick video from one of our students and his experience, because I love the way he's described this as well.
Our expenses exceeded income by $507 that month. In April, and actually I guess May, our income exceeds expenses by almost $1,200. So there's a $1,700 monthly turnaround, and we're giving 6 times more now than we did back in November.
Oh my gosh.
We actually had in our budget these organizations that are really important to us, and we put at the beginning of every month, like, we're going to give this much to this organization and this much here. By the time we got to that every single month, we're like, no, maybe next month.
Yeah.
Now those same organizations are still in our budget, and we're actually able to give. I felt like we had tried so many other systems and nothing had worked for us consistently. Every month we would start with, like, by creating this pristine budget. We know exactly where how much money is going to be coming in and what's going to be going out. As long as everything is perfect and we're perfect, this should be fine. And every single month consistently, we had significantly more money going out than money coming in. I'm not even exaggerating. Sometimes I'll do some of the pre-work by myself in advance because I can't wait. I can't wait to see how things are shaking out for the month. We look forward to talking about our personal finances.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I've never felt so compelled to reach out to the course creator and say, this has been actually life-changing. And I'm just so grateful. My wife is just so grateful.
Yeah.
It's been a huge turnaround for us. Very empowering.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So
I love that.
I love John's story. And I think what I love about it is, for us, like, just being completely transparent for you, like, this whole system, the system, he's a student in our Real Money Method course. I think the thing I love so much about it is I never planned on making this course. And I just thought, well, this is kind of working for us. It probably, I don't know if it'll help anybody else. And you all but forced me to turn it into a course.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't think that much of it. And so when you create something and then someone else just gets amazing results, it's like, this is so fun. This is so exciting.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, we now have a page of, I don't know, probably 50 or 100 like amazing testimonials like John's, where it's like just been amazing to watch what God has done. But anyway, all that to say, just as a creator, it just is really, really exciting seeing people be impacted by the thing that you create,
Yeah.
So anyway, but I loved what he said, this idea of they now went through that cycle and now it's exciting for them to talk about.
Yeah, like him saying, I can't wait. Like, I look at it early because I can't wait to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy.
But it's the same way that I felt, where, like, for so many years, it's like, I don't want to look. I just want to ignore it. But once you go through that, it's like it becomes addicting and it becomes fun and exciting, and you want to do more and you want to be proactive and you want to be ahead. And that's why it is like this cycle that just continues and builds on itself.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that is the chaos loop and the freedom loop. I hope that you don't have a lot of chaos loop going on in your life. And the fact is that these two can be working simultaneously. Like, we're dealing with a triggering event now that we're working to, to squash and to keep in its place. But triggering events never stop. But the point is if you aren't moving forward in the freedom loop, like those triggering events can just derail you and pull you down so fast.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're trying to break out of. So anyway, so hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, feel free to share it with a friend. Tag us on Instagram. Take a screenshot of it, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I think that's it.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
See ya.
See y'all.